The first feature-length sound version of A Christmas Carol, 1935's Scrooge, draws heavily from the silent era of film. It's clearly going for a German expressionist look with long shadows, surrealist imagery, and a genuinely creepy vibe. The Ghost of Christmas Past is portrayed as a beam of light, and the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come is only portrayed in shadow that's cast over Scrooge. There's a beautiful scene where we fly down the street and over the city's skyline that could easily have been directed by F.W. Murnau. There's also a scene with chefs goofing around at the Lord Mayor's banquet that feels like it's right out of a silent comedy. And there's a scene at the end where Scrooge gets doused with snow that does too. So, why doesn't it draw inspiration from any silent versions of A Christmas Carol? It's one of the most influential books ever written. Even if you've never read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, you are familiar with it. My name is Colin Murr, and I've loved this story for as long as I can remember. I'm going to be looking at every film and TV adaptation of A Christmas Carol I can, because I love the story that much. This is Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast. The Silent Christmas Carols, 1922 to 1923. Today, we're wrapping up my series on silent film adaptations of A Christmas Carol. There are a total of 6 known to exist, and we're finishing up with the final 2 today. First up, it's a 1922 short film simply called Scrooge. This comes from a series of literary adaptations named Tense Moments with Great Authors, and this was run as a single feature in 1922. A lot of these tense moments come from Dickens' books, including one from A Tale of Two Cities and 2 from Oliver Twist. It appears that most of these shorts that make up the film are lost, but the opening text of Scrooge tells us that it was released as a short on its own in 1929. This one was directed by George Wynne, who did some other acting and directing in the silent era, as well as some acting in the early sound era, but he's not a household name today. Henry Vernon Esmond plays Scrooge here, and like Wynne, he doesn't have a lot of known credits. None of the other actors are credited on screen, and IMDb doesn't even make up anything here, so this one's really obscure. Like so many of these, we get another stereotypical Scrooge costume: chaotic hair, large top hat, overdone makeup. I will say that this run of costumes and performances really makes me appreciate Seymour Hicks even more yet again. His performance in the silent era truly stands out, so it's no surprise that he was the only one who went on to play Scrooge in sound. Despite being a short that's part of a longer series, this one does try to go through the whole story in about 10 minutes, or 15 to 20 minutes, as the intro text tells us was the length. Because of this, we do really rush through the ghosts, which we're pretty used to at this point. The most interesting thing here is the intertitles, which are a bit more poetic than usual. It often is close to what's in the book, but it tends to go in a more flowery direction. For example, when Scrooge leaves his office, Christmas Eve night, on such a night, the spirit of a man who has never given is sometimes doomed to walk the earth in dream and witness the happiness he might have shared. This isn't a line of dialogue from Marley here, but just some scene setting. There's not a Marley on the door knocker scene, but there's still plenty of build up to the ghost appearing. It's interesting how many different spins on the ringing bells there are in film versions of A Christmas Carol. Bells ring because a ghost is arriving. It's an old trope. How many different ways can you depict it? Well, I've counted at least 3 unique ones. Last week, we saw Marley himself physically ringing the bell. In the Alistair Sim film from 1951, the bells themselves don't move in an attempt to show that the ringing is clearly supernatural. Here, the bells are filmed with a ghostly transparent effect. I mean, sure, it's going for the same thing that the Sim one is, but that's still a different way to do it. Marley's entrance here is really effective. It's shot with those same ghostly effects we almost always see, but it's clear that great effort was taken. It really looks like he's in the room with Scrooge. Marley may not have had that line from earlier, but he does get a confusing line on his own, saying, "I am the ghost of what you shall be." I mean, sure, but since there's also a ghost of Christmas yet to come, this feels a little confusing. Sadly, when we see Marley's face in close up, it does look a little strange. He's wearing these big, goofy glasses, and while his head is wrapped up, we mostly see it in profile. Kind of looks like he has toilet paper on his head. This goes to show how easy it is for this to accidentally look silly instead of scary. It's often the performance that falters, and I mean, yeah, the expressions here are a lot too, but the costume is the real problem. I know, me being particular about Jacob Marley again, super surprising on this podcast. This film is the rare one that confirms Scrooge is dreaming, as when the ghost of Christmas Past shows up, we see Scrooge's spirit stepping right out of his body. We don't get much of the past, though. We see Scrooge when he was younger, barely, with another man standing over his shoulder. Is it Marley? Fezziwig? Dick Wilkins? Who knows? We're told he's carefree and happy here, but he's still at his desk working. Then we see him getting greedy and counting his money, with one intertitle saying, "You made your gold your god." This sounds like something Bell would say, but all we see is Scrooge counting money, and then we get a cut to Bob Cratchit's home in Christmas Present. In his book, A Christmas Carol and Its Adaptations, Fred Guida actually was able to help with the discovery of this film. However, he notes that the Library of Congress's version was not complete, only including 825 feet of film, compared to the original 1,280 feet. Therefore, we can assume that there was more here, including, likely, Bell. And the jarring cut to Cratchit's home wasn't so jarring. However, Guido was unsure if the harsh edits were from the late 1920s American release of this individual short or some other cutting that was done. Here's yet another reason why it feels wrong to review these in comparison to the other films on my main podcast. This is basically an incomplete, stitched together short where we don't even know what was in the full version. The charity workers aren't here, but who knows that they were in the original version? Wouldn't be the first time an American version downplayed the poverty message. We see the ghost of Christmas Present and Scrooge at the Cratchits, and Bob seems to raise a toast to Scrooge without complaint. Again, though, maybe there was more here. Then we're suddenly in a graveyard with Scrooge and Christmas yet to come, where Scrooge sees his own grave. The text on the grave is kind of hilarious. Quote, Ebenezer Scrooge, himself without human kindness, he died without friends. Unquote. That is harsh. Again, maybe this intertitle was only in the recut American version. It's hard to know. We do seem to have all of the Christmas morning scenes, though, which only serves to make the pacing even weirder. At least there is a little bit of Fred on Christmas morning here, and the scene of Scrooge and Cratchit making up plays well. Like with most of these, we do see the craft of film evolve a bit here. There are now close ups and more edits, making the film move and flow better. Of course, it moves awkwardly because of those aforementioned cuts. Want even more Scrooge A Christmas Carol podcast? Just go to my Patreon at patreon.com/Scrooge A Christmas Carol podcast, where for just $5 a month, you can get a bonus episode every month of the year. There, I cover various TV shows versions of A Christmas Carol. For $10 a month, you can even vote on what episode I do next. Additionally, for just $1 a month, you can get all episodes 24 hours early. Again, just go to patreon.com/Scrooge A Christmas Carol podcast or follow the link in the description. All right, one more to go, and it's A Christmas Carol from 1 year later in 1923. Like so many of these, this has been referred to as both Scrooge and A Christmas Carol. This one, thankfully, exists in its entirety, all 27 minutes of it. Also, there are opening credits here, so we do know who a few of the major players are. Scrooge is played by Russell Thorndike, an actor and World War I veteran who was discharged following an injury at Gallipoli. However, he is best known today for neither of these things, but rather as the author of the Dr. Sin series of novels. The existing print of this film has some Christmas carols on it, which must have been added in a re release. The existing print that we have is rough, but the text is at least readable. Like with the one before it, we get some flowery text here. Quote, Wise men have always contended that the toughest skin that covers any animal is to be found on that of a miser. Unquote. Ah, yes, the classic words of Charles Dickens. Purple prose about animal skin. Bob Cratchit, played by an uncredited actor, is clearly meant to resemble the way he is drawn in the classic John Leach style from the book. And the scene of him and Scrooge at the end drinking a toast together is a deliberate shout out to the final illustration of the book. It's some very nice attention to detail. However, the print of the film is so bad that the short, long faced Bob Cratchit sometimes looks like Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera. So, are any of the other Leech illustrations recreated? Well, actually, yes. When Marley, played by Jack Denton, who sounds like a famous film star with his name, but actually wasn't, shows up, the room is set up just like it is in the first Saves illustration. Sadly, they don't go for all the illustrations, though. We don't get the Wandering Spirits. We wouldn't get those until the Alistair Sim film, at least in the films we still have. Maybe there's a lost one that included them, but I would be surprised. It was hard enough to have the ghost effects for one ghost at a time. Well, this one is really into the ghost effects. We don't get shot for shot recreations of any of the ghost illustrations either. What we do get is more influence from that J.C. Buckstone play I mentioned way back in the first episode of this series. There's only one charity worker. The visions are projected onto Scrooge's wall, albeit by separate ghosts. And Fred's wife gets more focus. Okay, I'm honestly not sure if she got more focus in the Buckstone play, as I'm just going off what Guida's book says about the Buckstone play, but she gets so much extra focus in these early versions that I have to think there was at least a stage version where she got that. Otherwise, she's just the breakout star of this era and then got very little focus again until 1984. However, even though she gets additional focus, she doesn't get a name except Mrs. Fred. We'll give women more screen time, but we won't respect them. To be fair, her husband, played by Forbes Dawson, is credited as Mr. Fred. So perhaps the filmmakers genuinely thought that was their last name, in the way people sometimes act like Scrooge is actually Ebenezer Scrooge's first name. She's played here by Nina Vanna, and we get an extra scene on Christmas Eve of her preparing for the party with her sister. When it comes to the Marley scene, we actually get a fairly lengthy scene, with a good bit of the dialogue from the book intact. It might be a little awkward with so many intertitles, but it's still a relatively effective take on the scene. Jack Denton's Marley costume looks great, and it's an effective look for the scene. It's shot well. Scrooge, unfortunately, is that same kind of caricature he is in pretty much all of these early films. He looks like a parody version of the book Scrooge, and he reacts enormously to everything that happens. We're more than 16 minutes into a 27-minute film when the Ghost of Christmas Past shows up. So, yeah, we're going to be rushing through the ghosts here. Christmas Past is shrunken down, probably showing off the effect because they could. Like I said, we really like to do the effects here. I mean, I suppose you could take the like a child descriptor from the book and approach it literally in terms of height, but that does have to ignore the part that also says he's like an old man. Even though we do get the different ghosts here, the visions of the past are projected onto Scrooge's wall, just like in the play. All this ghost shows him as his breakup with Belle. It's mostly covered in intertitles, which means we're still in that kind of overly dialogued silent film that doesn't end up having much staying power in the culture. In the book, Scrooge makes the ghost disappear by snuffing it out with its own extinguisher cap. It's very clear the filmmakers wanted to do that here, but were unable. Scrooge does some really over the top motions and asks the ghost to stop haunting him, which leads to the ghost extinguishing himself instead. It really comes close to being effective, but at the end of the day, it just looks like the ghost putting on a little hat. There's also something very out of character when the ghost disappears. Scrooge says, "Humbug, it's all humbug," which is very weird to still be saying at this point. In the book, Scrooge is done saying it after the Marley haunting. He starts to and realizes he can't because he doesn't think it's humbug anymore. So saying it after the Ghost of Christmas Past is way down the line for that. The scene with the Ghost of Christmas Present is even shorter. How, you might ask? They don't even go anywhere. He just tells Scrooge that Bob Cratchit and Fred have Christmas spirit and he's just selfish. Apparently, this is enough, as Scrooge says he's not the man he was. That's all it took. Interestingly, though, they do go all out in making this ghost a giant. Again, the special effects are the real star here. When the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come shows up, Scrooge reacts in such terror that it looks like he's being choked by Darth Vader. All we get of this future is Scrooge's grave, but at least they leave the house to go visit it. However, the prose gets a little odd again when Scrooge says, Are these the shadows of tombs that will be instead of just things that will be? Christmas Yet to Come also has the least interesting look of the ghosts, although this may just be due to the poor film stock. Maybe the cloak looks creepier when we can see it properly. On Christmas Day, Scrooge goes to Fred's, and we even get a mention of Topper. However, he doesn't do anything for the Cratchits on Christmas. They really get the short end of the stick in this one, and we don't even know if Tiny Tim exists here. It's really rare to have a version of the story without Tiny Tim. Of course, on the day after, we still get the scene of Scrooge making up to Bob, raising his salary, and drinking a toast with him. So, yet again, we've got a version that focuses on one thing and leaves a lot else by the wayside. Special effects have improved, but this still isn't really a full version of the story. I don't think any of the film is missing in this case, but it still feels like things are missing. As far as I can find out, this was the final silent film version of A Christmas Carol made. Others were re released, and I think some were re released as experiments with sound as well. A lot of early sound film was that. But it wouldn't be until 1935 when a feature film version came out with sound. There may have been a short film that came out in 1928 with sound, but the sources seem mixed on whether this actually existed. The IMDb for it suggests it was simply an audio recording starring Bransby Williams, who made more than one audio recording as Scrooge during his life. Now, whether it was a re release of a previous silent version with this audio track or this was something new entirely, who knows? I will talk more about these when we get to radio and audio versions of the story, which I will be covering. Before summing up this era as a whole, there is one more film I want to briefly touch on. Pretty much every existing version from this era is a short. Even the 50-minute Scrooge from 1913 rushes through the ghosts and feels more like an experiment. As far as we know, there was only one full length silent version of A Christmas Carol, 1916's The Right to Be Happy. It was produced by Universal, and it was directed by Rupert Julian, who also played Scrooge. You may not know that name, but you do know his work. He was the director of the 1925 Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera. The film also starred iconic silent film actress Claire McDowell as Mrs. Cratchit, and we seem to have more existing information on this film than we do of many of these films that actually exist. For example, the Wikipedia page for this thing is massive, feeling more like somebody's overly wordy essay than an encyclopedia entry. Since this thing is so obscure, I guess no one's flagged that page yet. And looking through it, someone definitely used AI to write it. So yeah, I'm not really trusting it as a source. I've gone to some of the sources it cites, and they don't offer as much as the Wikipedia page seems to suggest. However, it was a universal picture, so I guess the production was more documented than others of the day. There just doesn't seem to be a lot about it here. There are some reviews that exist from motion picture magazines of the day, but they tend to be pretty straightforward, mostly just praise the cast. There are a couple of stills, though, from this film, with Julian as Scrooge being haunted by Jacob Marley and a few others. So we do have some evidence of this one at least. There's a detailed plot description on the wiki page, but it's just a description of the book's plot. There are a few stills, like I said. I hope one day this is discovered, but as with most silent films, I doubt it. They also seem to suggest that the character of Caroline made an appearance here. She is in Christmas Yet to Come when she and her husband are relieved that Scrooge has died because now maybe they'll be passed on to a kinder debtor. And I have no idea if this is true. I couldn't find something in the research through I did of the sources to confirm that Caroline was in it. I assume they're guessing because there was notes about an actress being cast, and she didn't seem to fit any of the traditional female roles in A Christmas Carol, like Belle, Fred's wife, Mrs. Cratchit. So I assume that's an assumption on their part that she was playing Caroline because I couldn't find anything. But again, I didn't go through every single one, so this is kind of a rabbit hole. But I hope this film is found one day. I'd like to see it. So here we are at the end of the silent era of Christmas carols. I've watched the six versions known to exist in some form. None of these are really going to be sought out for entertainment. Some have a better narrative structure than others, but none are really complete. We see a few very common things popping up throughout, including ghosts being rushed through, the visions being projected on Scrooge's wall, and the consistently increased presence of Fred's wife. This is a story without any major female characters, although plenty of supporting ones. And it was the era of the silent film ingenue. If you want to pick a young character to cast them as, she makes sense. Belle is often in just a few seconds of these films, after all. Over the years from the 1900s to the 1920s, you can see the technology evolving, but the filmic language only does a little bit. I find that interesting because there are other oft adapted works that don't have this problem. Dracula has been a regularly adapted book since the early days of film, and one of its adaptations is one of the iconic silent films, 1922's Nosferatu. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is another of the most adapted works of all time, and its 1920 adaptation with John Barrymore is something of a silent classic. Sure, those are different works than A Christmas Carol, but no one is arguing that the legacy of Dracula on film starts with Bela Lugosi. For the most part, I just don't see a lot of influence on the later films coming from these silent ones. The silent films definitely borrowed from the stage, and the early sound films drew from it too, particularly in the casting of Seymour Hicks. The 1935 and 1938 films both make significant cuts to the ghost portion of the story, and the 1935 film does take a while to get going with the ghosts, but doesn't do it in a way that seems influenced by any of these silent versions. The caricatured costumes of these Scrooges, save for the 1913 Seymour Hicks one, definitely don't have any influence on the 1935 or 1938 film. I still think they might have had some influence on the two Basil Rathbone TV versions, as his costume looks similar and his performance is equally hammy. But that's really all I see. Like I referenced at the beginning of the episode, what's interesting is that the 1935 film is clearly drawing from the silent era of film, but it's not referencing any silent versions of A Christmas Carol that still exist. It's a majorly German expressionist film and it has really unique visuals, but it's not drawing from these versions. Later film versions of A Christmas Carol would draw from early sound films. I tend to think it's mostly the Sim and the Finney ones so far, at least. But no one was drawing from the silent ones, save for some special effects. We get Marley on the door knocker in that very first one, and that would be recreated throughout adaptations. And we get the ghost effects that would be done in very much the same way, I'm sure. But beyond those, these don't have much of a legacy. The most interesting ones to me are the two lost ones I've talked about in some detail. Of the ones we have, I would say the 1914 one tells the story the best, and the 1913 one has the best, see only, Good Scrooge. The others have interesting details in history. If you want to seek them out, they are all easily available, but they don't come off as required viewing unless you are a true completionist. So, yeah, that is the end of my series on the silent Christmas carols. I will return to this at any point should one of these be discovered. I don't think it's going to happen, but you never know. So, films are being discovered still. If one is discovered, I will do an episode on it. And if you come across one that is before I'm aware of it, please bring it to my attention. Next month, I am going to be covering what is, to my knowledge, the only Easter spin on A Christmas Carol. So that will be next month. We'll talk about an Easter version of A Christmas Carol. You can stay tuned for a few extra thoughts here. And thank you for listening to Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast. So there we have it. That is all the silent film adaptations of A Christmas Carol that are known to exist. And I wanted to touch on the two that I thought had an interesting history as well. There is a lot on that wiki about the right to be happy. It feels like one of those old Wikipedia pages where someone really just transferred their film essay on a movie into a Wikipedia page. Most of those have been flagged and deleted in recent years, just for more of a unified look. I think the funniest one was, this is really off topic, but it always makes me laugh. There used to be pages and pages on the obscure, forgotten 1990s baseball movie with Tom Selleck called Mr. Baseball. Uh, they wrote like paragraph long character descriptions for each and every character in the movie. It was really fun. I don't know why someone did it, but they did. I hope people have archived that on the Wayback Machine because it was really funny. Another one which makes more sense was there was a really, really long one for No Country for Old Men talking about the themes and interpretations, things like that. But that's been cut back as well recently. Those are the two I remember. One makes sense. One is just a hilarious outsider. But yeah, for some reason, there's a very, very long entry on all of the major players and their entire history for 1916's The Right to Be Happy. Uh, I don't know why. Someone felt like doing it, I guess. Much of it clearly written by AI, so don't trust any of it. I think it's interesting. That's why I mentioned it because it's there, but also even if it's sourced, I was checking some of the sources and it does not seem reliable. Uh, the cast list is confirmed from what I can tell in other sources. So the cast list you see there of who was in the movie is right. But in terms of the plot description, I didn't find any very specific details. So is Caroline in this version? I don't know. It's very possible. It's at least a feature length version. It was apparently about 62 minutes. So that's even longer than the movie called Scrooge or Old Scrooge, which was 50 minutes, but like half intertitles. So I hope you found interesting things in this episode and this whole series on Silent Christmas Carols. I had my doubts that it would be something that people are interested in, but I had seen other people who go into Christmas Carol history talking about them. And I said I was only going to do it if I could find an interesting way to attack it. I think I did okay. I didn't want to make it, like I said, in the main series because it's not a part of the story I'm trying to tell of these adaptations. It's a side quest essentially. In the same way that a Christmas Carol deep dive is not, in my mind, essential to the podcast. It's nice if you're really into it and want to get more details. That's the kind of stuff I'm covering in the off season. For me, the main story of the podcast, I'm using story in a loose sense here, but the main story of the podcast is going through every straightforward adaptation. Everything else is bonus. So, you get on my Patreon, you get the TV episodes of A Christmas Carol, and they're fun. I enjoy reviewing those. I have fun, especially if it's a show like that you can really get into the meat of. But those are by no means essential to the legacy of A Christmas Carol on film. The Patrick Stewart version isn't taking something from the real Ghostbusters, for example, random example. But I still like covering those, and obviously people want to hear it. And I'm trying to cover as many facets of adaptation as I can. I felt like if I started with the silent films, I would not be building an audience and I would not be starting at an interesting place. I think the Seymour Hicks film from 35 is the most interesting place to start, contrasted with the MGM film from 38. So I've really come to appreciate, I think I said this last time as well, the 35 film. I used to like it that much, thought it was okay. It's really risen in the ranks for me. I really appreciate how unique it is now that I've seen so many versions, just how much that one stands out. That was kind of my point when I attacked it at the beginning, is that it's really different than any others. But more and more, I just see that it's unlike any other version. Not the best way the story has been told. Not even close. Not the best performance of Scrooge, but a good one. But it makes me appreciate that one more because it's such an outlier and it takes such swings visually. Sometimes they don't work. I think The Invisible Marley is terrible, but like I said, it draws from the silent era really, really significantly, but not any existing Christmas Carol in the silent era. So yeah, that's intriguing. Not that, most, I'm not saying every adaptation of a classic work is going to be drawing from other adaptations of a classic work. But for example, Dracula, to go to example, because there's so many Dracula films. Nosferatu 1922, Dracula 1931, right? And then the Hammer Dracula from the 50s. Those are like the first major big ones, not counting sequels. So they each had their own style. But even by the time they got to the 50s one, they were making something that was deliberately different from the 30s one with Bela Lugosi. They knew how iconic that had become. And then you get to something like the remake of Nosferatu, which is very much drawn from that, but it's also entirely its own thing. So it's referencing existing versions of the story. It knows of their existence. I'm not saying it's being meta, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And then you get something like Coppola's version from the 90s, which is clearly shouting out little bits from each version, right? It's just, it kind of becomes part of the amalgamation at that point. Just, you can't tell Dracula on film at this point without acknowledging or deliberately avoiding all the other famous versions because there are so many. Like even Gary Oldman in that film said he was only going to do it if he got to do a Transylvanian accent like Bela Lugosi, right? Even though that's not how the character speaks in the book. So even if you're not deliberately referencing a past version, you're drawing on it in some way. And I suppose the most you can say about 1935 and 1938 versions of A Christmas Carol is that they just said absolutely nothing in regards to the previous silent versions. They just said we're going to do something entirely different, and that's probably wise. Except again, special effects. I suppose you could say those are drawn from the silent versions, but visually, there's not a resemblance really. Scrooge doesn't look anything like he does in the silent versions, either the Seymour Hicks or the Reginald Owen one from '38. I think Reginald Owen looks ridiculous in that film, but he doesn't look like the 1910s, 1920s Scrooges with their like wild mane of hair. He's very bald in that with a little bit weird on top. And Seymour Hicks just has the totally disheveled look, but he doesn't have the long hair of some of the other Scrooges. So he kind of created his own look for Scrooge, and they're similar. His 1935 one and his 1913 one kind of have similar looks, and it was so lived in, like I said, in the 1913 film, which is great in comparison to like the pantomime performances of the other silent films. And I realized it is literally pantomime, but to see just how Seymour Hicks embodies the character, it's very impressive. And I think the 1938 film obviously was drawing from at least the legacy of the radio version, where Lionel Barrymore had played Scrooge because he was supposed to play Scrooge in the film. That didn't happen. So there is obviously no adaptation of A Christmas Carol that exists in a vacuum. I just find it interesting that even though there was a consistent stream of silent Christmas carols made, they have almost no legacy in the story of adaptations. So, yeah, that's what's interesting about it to me is that they don't have much staying power. But yeah, they are all available. They're very samey. So, don't expect entertainment in the same way. That if you've seen one, you've seen what most of them are going for. Like I said, 1913 has the best Scrooge. 1914 probably has the best storytelling, but you can see better effects in the later versions, of course. So, yeah, that is all I've got to say about the silent versions for now. It's been an interesting little side road to go down about this. So, like I said, next month we're going to be talking about the only Easter version that I'm aware of A Christmas Carol. So you can look forward to that because it will be the month of Easter in April. Right time for that. I did a 4th of July one last year, which is a terrible, terrible film. And I have not seen this one I'm covering, so I'm not going to say anything about it beyond that. So stay tuned for that. Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast is written, edited, and hosted by Colin Murr. Theme music is Christmas Day by TRG Banks. Leaving a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing on YouTube will be a big help to me. You can also back me on Patreon for early episodes, bonus episodes, and the right to vote in polls. Link is in the description. I'll be back next month with another episode of Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast. Until then, make sure to live in the past, the present, and the future, and ensure that the spirits of all three strive within you.